Welcome to another episode of French Toast Fridays. My name is Andy Jolivet, and I'm joined by my good friend, Tyler McCarty. What's up, buddy?
Hi.
It's good to see you, buddy.
You too.
Behind the scenes, as always, we have Marco Zitzer, our friend who does not get a microphone. But Marco, thanks for making us look and sound good. The three of us are friends who have businesses that allow us to do meaningful work in the world. This podcast was born during a conversation right here at Tyler's house. We were talking about all of the people we know who are living great stories that deserve to be shared, that can serve as a source of inspiration for others. Just like today, Tyler made us French toast.
Yes, and just like today, it's Friday.
Man, it was a Friday, hence French Toast Fridays. Whether you are tuning in from your commute or on the treadmill, or maybe while taking a moment to just unwind, we want to remind you that life is best when it's simple and sincere with plenty of syrup. Our guest for today's conversation is Ellie Roscher. Before we talk to Ellie, we want to thank you for listening. If you enjoy this conversation, feel free to subscribe. Let us know what you think of the show. Tell your friends. I think that's it for now.
Tell them all.
Let's just
Let's
hop
get
into
into
it.
it. Let's do this.
French Toast Fridays. This episode of French Toast Fridays is sponsored by Legacy River Coffee. Legacy River, savoring tradition, one sip at a time. Ellie Roscher is a writer, editor, teacher, and speaker. She's a wife and mother, a yoga instructor and podcast host. I would list all of her published books and graduate degrees, but it would take a while. So instead, I will just say welcome, Ellie Roscher, to French Toast Fridays.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
I'm so happy to be here.
It's good to have you. Glad that it worked out for you to have a conversation with us. We want to start by just asking some basic questions to get us rolling, get the ball going here. We are going to touch on some of those things that I just mentioned in the introduction about the kinds of outlets you have for your own vocational passions and interests. But first, let's go back a ways. What was Ellie's first job?
My first job was coaching gymnastics.
Cool.
So I started gymnastics when I was 4. I competed through college. And I think when I was maybe about 14, the club that I trained at hired me to help assist with the littles, like with the little preschool gymnastics. So that was my first job. I loved it.
That's awesome.
That is a great job.
It was a great job. It was a great job. Yeah.
You can answer this question if you want, but I have a secondary option as well.
Okay.
Oftentimes we've asked people what their greatest fear was as a kid, and maybe that's just a nod to how scared I've been my whole life and how big of a role fear has played. So you can answer that if you want, but I want to give maybe another side of that coin. And I think that somehow me knowing you and a little bit of your work maybe inspired this. But do you remember the first time you felt truly encouraged and believed in?
Ooh, okay. Whoa. I'll do both. So the first thing that popped into my head about my fear, I had this bizarre, like irrational fear of quicksand. I think I saw a scene in a movie when I was too young where someone was sinking in quicksand, and I like fixated on it as like what a horrible way that would be to die.
Was it
And
Princess
so,
Bride? Because that scene
it
scene terrified me.
Yeah.
with the rodents of unusual size.
Yes.
Yes. And so I remember I have this distinct memory of doing my like nightly prayers and praying that I never stepped in quicksand. And so then that opened up the conversation with my parents where they realized how afraid I was and kind of helped me through how little quicksand there was in Minnesota. And that I would be okay. And if I can just nerd out on this a little bit more, I think about this a lot because a gymnast's job basically is to override fear. But like your body is saying, I'm afraid you're doing this very dangerous thing. And my job as a gymnast was to ignore that and to like suppress my fears. And so I do think at a very young age, I got good at like naming my fears and then seeing them as barriers that I could work around. I grew up in a household that was really encouraging. And so I don't know that I have a specific memory, but I just felt so buoyed by my parents just really telling me that I could do anything that I wanted to do. And part of it was that I appreciate about them. I was doing it for me, not for them. They made it crystal clear, like, you can do anything you want to do. We are going to support you in it, but you're not doing it for us. And that was really special to start out with that support, but then also knowing I wasn't doing it out of obligation or to earn love. I was doing it because I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
You wanted it.
Yeah, I do think my parents were my first source of that.
Healthy.
That is good.
Very healthy.
I know, I'm very lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah, you had that, and you had very little quicksand to worry about.
Yeah.
Two solid things. Minnesota was a really good spot for you to grow up.
Two major elements that we have for success.
Yeah. All right. This is a one-word question. Aliens?
Absolutely.
Ooh, one-word answer.
Oh.
Touche.
Are you good with that, or do you want to? You have more than one word.
I think I just think it's way more interesting to walk through the world holding space for uncertainty. I think part of my vocation in theology is that I'm small and other things are big, and so my brain is limited, and I do know that there's something bigger than me that I don't fully understand, and I'm into that mystery. So the particulars, I don't really nerd out about the particulars, but I'm just open to mystery and wonder and not having everything figured out. So to me, yeah, aliens, yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
So the absolutely is something is out there that I don't know or understand, and that is exciting to me.
That's good.
Cool. What's the best thing that you've done recently that didn't cost any money?
Oh, that's so good. Cuddles. I'm a big physical affection person. My kids are still at the age where they'll snuggle me. So that's part of our morning and evening ritual. And we recently also got a cat. I've never had a pet. And somehow we got an extremely affectionate cat that just wants to snuggle. So I would say that that physical affection and the co-regulation is definitely a part of my daily practice that I prioritize, that is not tied to money.
So your kids don't charge you to snuggle?
No.
Okay. Talk to
Tyler's kids are rich. They are so wealthy already.
Charging me to snuggle.
Don't give them any ideas.
Jeez.
Yeah. No, but she was also encouraged as a kid by her parents, and
That's a good point.
yeah. All right, last of the 5 questions, and then probably so many other questions, some of which will tap into what you've already shared. But if you were invited to give a TED Talk, what would the topic be? Or maybe even just the title?
Okay, I'm thinking a lot right now about allyship, and what does it mean to do work at my body level so I can show up in community calm and present, and recognize the privilege my body has in society to strategically press levers, but in a way that's not doing harm. That's what it's obviously not ready for a TED Talk yet, but that's what I've been thinking about a lot lately.
So the self-regulation of your nervous system through daily practices, maybe cuddles, snuggles, kittens.
Yes.
Okay, so I think the next direction I'm going to go from this is embodiment, because you've been dancing around it. You just haven't used the word, right?
Yeah.
So you have a book called The Embodied Path.
Yes.
And you also have a virtual community for writing and wellness that has that kind of embodiment as the kind of core focus or goal through the writing and wellness things. But the blurb for your book, Embodied Path, is that our bodies are always talking to us, trying to get our attention. Our work is to unfold, to listen, and to claim the truth about our beautiful, storied bodies. I guess my question that you could go in any direction from, but what kind of things are our bodies telling us that we either can't understand or haven't slowed down and been quiet enough to hear or listen?
Okay, I'll tell you a story just to begin. I I got a really cool gig where I got invited to lead wellness sessions at a castle in England.
Hmm.
It was just the most delightful invitation. So I flew to London, I drove to this castle, I was doing wellness sessions, I was doing one-on-ones, and my days weren't stressful, they weren't busy. And the story I was telling is like, I'm fine, I'm energized, this is good, this is easy. On my way home from doing that work, I got stuck in Iceland for a day. And the moment that I walked into the like vouchered hotel and just like put my bag down and took a breath, I started crying. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. I think our bodies are incapable of lying. So my body was telling the truth, and it's like my body knew before my mind did. And so I turned toward it, and I just was like, I am so tired. And so the whole time I was working, because I was holding space for other people, and I was being, my professional self, and I'm good at that. I enjoy it. I was like, I'm, I was telling myself a story that was kind of on the surface. The second I let myself be still and quiet, what was underneath the surface was deep exhaustion. And so in Iceland, I slept for 12 hours straight, which is not normal for me.
Sure.
And then just kind of like stayed under the bed and rested until my flight home. And so that would be an example where my body was trying to get my attention, but I'm going to argue, we live in a disembodied society where we're focused on productivity and efficiency to the point where it doesn't behoove us to listen to our bodies. We just go faster and kind of stay on the surface. And then that forces our bodies to ramp up the volume to get our attention.
Yeah, and we do that physically. We do that with what we take in with food. We're all on the fast level with fast food, and yeah, we totally turn a deaf ear to our bodies then. So
That's right. Faster,
yeah.
faster, like more. And so one of the things I do is I teach yin yoga. And the first time I took a class, I knew it was my growing edge because the teacher cued us. We get into a posture with a bunch of props, and the practice is to disengage our muscles. And so then that places the awareness on our connective tissue, on our fascia. And she said, where could you do a little bit less? And I actually laughed out loud because like no one had ever asked me that question before. Where could you do less? It's always, I love working hard. I love, I have kind of perfectionist type A tendencies. And so I knew kind of that like doing less and softening was my growing edge that ended up having really positive repercussions for my body as well as my mind. So when we slow down and get a little bit more quiet, then our bodies can speak to us a little bit more clearly. And really my embodiment work is, can we bring our bodies to the table with our minds so that how we are feeling is one way of being that can inform the conversation.
This is the point in the show where my wife would watch later and she'd roll her eyes because I'm going to say something stupid. But when you said I went to a castle to teach a session, I immediately pictured you up doing a yoga class, and everybody in the class was wearing like armored knights. And
I think you have to if you're in a castle.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was like, oh. So.
It's really hard to do yoga in armor.
So loud.
There were armored knights in the hallways, but people did take off their armor to do the yoga.
That's great. Oh, good for them. Flexibility is key.
Yeah.
Well, I couldn't help but hear a connection between how you talked about gymnastics and quieting that part of your brain and your body that said you should be afraid because this is dangerous or whatever, and how much those of us who are not gymnasts, I can't touch my toes to save my life.
Sad.
It is. But I've had to learn to recognize emotion, fear being the one that is overdeveloped. I think that when it comes to our emotional selves, we have like some overdeveloped emotions and then some under. I think about it like dudes that go to the weight room and skip leg day because they're just doing bench and arms all the time, right? Like, because those are like the beach muscles, the mirror muscles.
Yeah.
And it's like when it came to my own emotional working out, I went to fear. And I was like, ooh, I'm good at this one. So I'm going to like just build them up. And then I think other things that actually are not fear, I start to interpret as fear, because I'm like, that's the one that I understand the most. And so how you recognize not just fear, but how do you recognize pain and sadness? How do you recognize joy and excitement? How do you recognize hope? You know, all the different ones. I think Inside Out, Pixar does a great job. And I'm so glad they have a new one coming out, whereas the girl gets to teenage years, new emotions show up, like embarrassment and shame, right? Like that's so right on. And so
that's cool.
So I don't know, like, what is your experience? Because obviously you're a person who practices and learns about embodiment in your own being. And then you actually write about it. And then through the different practices like the yoga and the yoga instruction and writing, how does writing and yoga fit into that? Or what is the similarities or the differences of how those are, I think, these healthy outlets for people to process and reflect?
Totally. So one thing that came up listening to you talk about fear is one of the questions that works for me is what's underneath, so recognizing that fear has become so familiar for you that fear might feel like home to you, but not ending our journey there, but asking what's underneath the fear, and so James Baldwin will say, a lot of people won't let go of their hatred because what's underneath is pain, and so what's underneath the emotion that is well practiced. So we're really creating neural pathways that go a little bit deeper, that do some extra excavation. And again, that's helpful when our bodies are feeling safe enough to go one layer deeper. So how can we create more environments where our nervous system feels safe enough to soften and explore instead of grip and tighten and override, right? So for me, in the Embodied Path, I talk about breath work, like conscious breathing, meditation, reflective writing, and movement as 3 of my pathways back home to my body. Now, those might not be yours, but our society is going to invite us to default to our minds and our egos. So what are the practices that invite our awareness to also come back down into our bodies and experience our bodies as home? My highest intelligence, if I take the multiple intelligences test, is kinesthetic, which means that my body is smart, but it also means I do my best thinking when my body is moving. And so, as a college athlete who then, ran marathons, started yoga, like movement has always been a pathway back home to my body. But writing it feels similar to me in that it's asking what's underneath. I'll start writing when I want to figure something out. I have an initial thought, but I don't want to land there. I want to excavate and say, well, what's underneath that? What's underneath that? So a lot of this work feels like healing work because I'm following the thread, maybe back to some of the origin moments that did some harm before my brain was fully formed. If I can get back to those, like Andy, I would wonder that there's certain moments in your childhood where fear took hold, and that pathway became more well-traveled. And so if we can get back to some of those origin moments and dwell in them, we can repattern our experience in a way that releases some of those emotions. So I also think about like Ross Gay is a poet, and he identifies grief. How he says it's the metabolization of change. And so I also think about like, what are the practices that help us metabolize the things that are going on in our bodies so they don't get stuck. Some of these emotions aren't good or bad, but when we get stuck in them, then that becomes problematic, right? So for me, movement, I can clear a stress cycle by going on a run, I can release something that I'm really spiraling about by writing through it and getting underneath it. And so part of the work of an embodiment is finding out what are your practices that support you doing that turning inward, the excavation, the asking what's underneath, and then like to get things moving so that we're not stuck, Gabor Mate talks about how like women in particular are conditioned to suppress anger. And the labor of suppressing anger, he likens to keeping a beach ball underwater. And so that if we do that over long periods of time, we become so exhausted that we burn out, we get sick. And so what are your tools where you allow your body to feel what it's feeling and move it, instead of getting stuck in it?
The movement, so many of our creative thinkers these days, some of the biggest thoughts they've come up with is just a simple walk in nature, and just connecting that way. And breathing was one of your 3 pieces too. And you think about like what the Stoics did with breathing, even in labor with Lamaze, and just the breathing and the centering and stuff. It's such an important thing that people just completely take for granted and forget about in this fast-paced world, going back to the beginning. So,
that's right. Yeah.
So,
that we can go a whole day without listening to the sound of our breath.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a tool that we always have with us. And because it's so ever present, we forget about it.
Mm-hmm. It's so simple, right?
Yeah.
So
and if you can't master something that's simple, how can you master something that's a little bit tougher?
Yeah.
Like touching your toes.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, yeah.
Well, sometimes we feel like our problems are big, so then we think that our solutions need to be big too.
Yeah. That's not a big problem. It's okay.
It's not, I mean, I've always had tight hamstrings.
The name of your book could be Don't Skip Leg Day, though.
Yeah.
And it could go into deep emotions
It
about
could be.
things.
It would be good. And for what it's worth, not that you asked me to actually share them, but my therapist does have notepads filled with stories and, reflections on my childhood. And there's things like EMDR, which is kind of like a trauma releasing technique within the therapy world to kind of allow the younger versions of yourself to let go a little bit and to feel safe with the things that they had been holding on to. I'm guessing you're familiar with the work of Resma Menakem and My Grandmother's Hands, and he talks about trauma living in our bodies. Yes. And he's specifically talking about kind of like the racial dynamics of that, but I think it extends to so many other things, is that trauma is the things that happen too fast, too soon, too much for us to handle at once. And so essentially we are stuck in some part of the grieving process, even if it's just like denying that the thing is actually real. I call it, I always talk about like how me and so many of my clients in the coaching world were really active reality wrestlers. But the problem is reality is undefeated. Like we never actually wrestle and pin reality, but yet we keep fighting that fight as if we're going to change the outcome. Right. And so then it's like worry, right? It gives us the illusion that we're doing something about the thing, but we're really just spinning our tires and wasting energy. So the breath, for me, I actually do that at the beginning of any session with clients, because I think, it's always rush hour up in our brains, right? We're always thinking, and we're thinking about so many things, and some of us are wired in a way that like we worry about things that will never happen, but we even know on an intellectual level that thing's not going to happen, but we're still preparing for it as if it might. We're great to have around if shit actually hits the fan, but it doesn't very often.
No. So much time is wasted.
Yeah, so we don't actually have to use those plans that we've created. But the breathing, and you can probably speak to this better than me, Ellie, about like the vagal tone and the vagus nerve system, and how we can't necessarily control our thoughts, but we can control our breath, as simple as that is. And so for me, if I'm going to talk to somebody about things deep and important, like their values, their purpose, their legacy, whatever the things are that we're going to talk about when I'm meeting with them, to actually shift gears from the everyday stuff that we trick ourselves into thinking is really important.
Yes. Would be
like a mental or emotional whiplash to go from that to like, where do you want to be in 30 years? Or what's the most important things in your life? Or when's the first time you felt truly encouraged and supported? Those kinds of things. So we take deep breaths, even if it's, 5 or 10 of them. And somewhere in doing that, all those tens of thousands of nerve endings that as your lungs expand and rub up against them and almost massage them and kind of remind yourself in all these little tiny embodied ways that like, you're okay, you're safe, you're going to be all right. You can shift gears and think longer term and wider view on your life. It kind of, your brain's like, what's going on down there? Oh, we're slowing down? Okay. And we can start to kind of match.
Yes.
Did you write the Pixar movie?
Peter Doctor should have called me, or he actually should have worked with Ellie.
Ellie, yeah.
He actually did work with the Greater Good Science Center out at UC Berkeley to go on that. I've taken their class, The Science of Happiness, and they actually were consultants on those films, and it shows because they clearly do understand that in a way that
it's simplistic.
Yeah, that kids can understand, and it's great. But like we all need that.
We all need that. That's right. When we slow our breath down, so just placing your awareness on your breath will automatically slow it down, even if you don't try. And then slowing your breath down automatically slows your heart rate down. And then that invites your thoughts to slow down as well. And I really think that when we're moving too fast is when we can do harm to ourselves and to other people. And so I've never regretted that move of just slowing down a little bit. And then the other thing is like, I found out a few years ago as a grown woman that I'm a paradoxical breather, which means that I was breathing backwards. So on your inhale, you're supposed to expand. And on my inhale, I sucked in, right? So that sent all my breath up into my upper chest. When you're breathing in your upper chest, your mind thinks you're being chased by a lion. Very exhausting, right? So when we can invite our breath down into our diaphragm, that diaphragmatic breath is what signals to our body you're safe. It's okay. There's no lion, right? Like this is time to digest your food, to rest your body. Then you get access to the deeper emotions because you're not trying to stay alive. And so my life totally changed when I was able to drop my breath down into my diaphragm, and people started to react to my body differently because I was inhabiting it. I wasn't constantly acting as if I was being chased by a lion.
Was your body producing cortisol and releasing that in those like almost fight or flight type feelings in your normal breathing or not?
Yeah, so it was like, so I didn't get tested at that level, but I do think that like I had problems with my jaw, with my neck, because like all of these muscles
Tight.
were
Tense.
so
Yeah.
exhausted from breathing up and down all day long. And and I was highly functioning. I ran marathons breathing up in my
Wow.
upper.
You should do it again now. You would probably kill that PR.
I know. Well, I've gotten faster. It's been so fun just to kind of do the things I used to do with access to my diaphragm. So the breath is very powerful.
I'd imagine the recovery time too for your body is so much better now because so much oxygen's getting into the blood and pulling.
Right.
So
How many people listening to this who have, like me, tense shoulders, neck, they're like, ooh, I think I have that too. No, you just need to chill. Like you need to start by just taking deeper breaths.
Oh, for sure.
But maybe also they should check into that because maybe they're breathing in reverse, which until a few minutes ago, I didn't know was a thing. Sounds exhausting.
It was exhausting. And here I am, like I was teaching yoga, saying the words like expand on your inhale and release on your exhale. And I didn't realize that I was doing the opposite.
Wow.
Someone else watched my body and was like, okay, hold on.
So I was going to ask you, can you visually see when an Andy is actually reverse breathing?
Yeah, I mean, so it's pretty typical in like gymnasts and dancers because we're taught to keep everything high and tight.
Yeah.
Right? Like that engagement of the core. But it also is a trauma response. And so my body remembered how to breathe very quickly. But those first few days were super, super vulnerable because every time I checked in with myself, I was breathing backwards. And so I had to kind of revise my body story a bit with that new piece of information. And it is something to check in on. But I do think even if you're not a paradoxical breather, just placing your palm, on your diaphragm and filling your palm with your breath at any point in the day, even 10 seconds can shift.
It's a good thing that's the hand placement on your diaphragm and not your toes, or else you wouldn't be able to engage
I would
in
never
this exercise.
I would never be able to do it. Although I could sit down and like I can kind of bend my leg and touch my toe that way.
Breathing wouldn't be the same though.
No, it wouldn't. I almost feel like maybe I'm thinking out loud here. We should let Ellie like lead us and anybody listening to this through like a short little breathing thing.
Great.
Yeah.
You open to that, Tyler?
I'm open to that.
I'm in.
Are you okay with that? This episode of French Toast Fridays is sponsored by Oak and Glen, a creative studio with a passion for visual storytelling. You can listen to Ellie's guided breathing exercise on the page for her episode at FrenchToastFridays.com or as a single slice of FTF on your favorite podcast platform.
It's the first time Andy's fallen asleep during a podcast session. But
Yeah, but I set an alarm. Paul Fletcher taught us that earlier when we were talking to him, that if you set an alarm, if you're going to fall asleep on air,
Yep.
So you don't.
Something to wake you up, back up. That was nice. Now, unfortunately, we have to pay Ellie for that.
Well, yeah, she let us do that. We just had a session. So does everybody else, though, that listened to this.
That's true. That was great.
I think
it was almost hypnotic.
that was great. I mean, because you use the word notice a number of times. And it was one of the things I noticed is it was nice to be on the other side because I'm so used to guiding other people through my own version of those types of little practices. So it's nice to be on the other side. But then if I'm being honest, the other thing I was noticing is like there's 3 12K cameras in front of me and a microphone.
Oh, I forgot about this.
And all that stuff. And then I was like, no, but Marco, he'll edit it so it's not like they're looking at me breathing, all those kinds of things. So like obviously at any moment there's those things. And then I was like, oh, what about the people that are driving to work right now? I hope they're not closing their eyes when they're driving. So
Or
I think
the
they're
treadmill.
probably, yeah.
How many people are laying behind their treadmills right now? Dang.
Have you ever tried to close your eyes on a treadmill?
Oh.
It is hard.
You know what else is hard? Watching the TV on the next treadmill over. It always drifts me over to the left.
Yeah, but you always do it.
Yeah, I do.
You always do it. It's like
I'm always watching better shows
It's
over
like in an airplane. I'm always watching my movie and the one in front of me.
Guilty. Oh, that's good. Well, thank you
Ellie.
for that. That was good. I don't know where my midbrain is. I was really having a hard time between my left and my right brain. I was like, it's somewhere right in between when you brought me back up there.
Yeah.
It's right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So, yes.
Yes.
Interesting. That's good feedback. Yeah. So I did that loop for, like 15 minutes, like a session, and it really opened that pathway where now I could do one loop and get back open. Right. So
do you do that daily in the morning? It's kind of one of your first things. And okay.
I have a couple breath exercises that work for me. That's one of my favorites. So I don't do it every day, but I do it often. Yeah.
So you've got a lot that even in our intro list, I'm like, how does she have time to do all this? How many children? 2 ages?
7 and 9.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Busy ages.
Yeah. And to be able to find that time for yourself just to breathe. I mean, I would imagine you're probably a pretty early riser.
She said she doesn't sleep much. So
okay.
That's right. I don't.
Which you couldn't.
Yeah, no, which surprises me because I think you're such a believer in good sleep, but maybe the sleep you do get is quality.
Yes, I do. So I'm very well rested. I will say that. And that's a new thing for me. I used to, wear that badge of busy. And honestly, it was writing the Embodied Path. I had to practice what I was writing about. And, my 40s has been about kind of a season of softening, of like allowing my body to have limitations and to have needs. And so sleep is part of that. My oldest is an early riser. He has been my alarm clock since the day he was born. But now that means 6. So I don't think that that's super brutal. He'll come in at 6 a.m. and wake me up for snuggles. And
which she doesn't charge it for. So.
Yeah, free snuggles.
Which I don't charge him for.
Note to listener.
So no, I feel well rested, and it's super inconvenient to listen to your body.
Yeah.
Because I used to just not and then just keep pushing, but there just were consequences for that. So I can do as many things as I do because I'm a freelancer. And so it seems I don't have one salaried job that I'm doing all of these things in addition to. It's like all of these additional things build a puzzle piece that is my full-time job.
Yeah. That's a good analogy, a puzzle piece. I was thinking, because everything you do seems to fit.
Yeah, they're all connected. Okay, so let's touch on some of your writing work. So
books.
You've written books, 12 Tiny Things, The Embodied Path, which we've talked about, Play Like a Girl. You have a children's book, Remarkable Rose, other books that you've edited and contributed to. The one I want to talk about a little bit, and I believe it was your first, How Coffee Saved My Life. Really, really intriguing title.
Right. Hooked me.
We have here Tyler, who has Legacy River Coffee Roasting, the company that he
saves
started.
My life.
And has brought him back and forth to Costa Rica in particular a number of times to meet the farmers who grow the beans that he buys, that he roasts. He knows, not only the grocery store managers and owners, but the individual people that he'll deliver coffee to regularly and all that. But tell us a little bit about that book. What does the title mean? Where does it come from? Talk about coffee. I'm going to just let you guys talk about coffee.
Why don't you step out of the room for a second, Andy? Let the adults talk.
I am a coffee enthusiast. I think it's a great title for the book. It attracted so many coffee enthusiasts who were then a little confused that coffee wasn't the only focus of the book. But I know, sorry, I still love nerding out with them about
It's
coffee.
like skipping leg day.
Um, it's a memoir about the year that I lived in Uruguay. And I was 25, typical like type A perfectionist, workaholic. And, here I was moving to South America, so ready to be really helpful. And then, of course, proceeded to realize how not helpful I was in rural Uruguay. So one of the funny parts of the story is that I had focused my first master's on urban areas. And so I thought I was going to Buenos Aires, Argentina. And then at the last minute, they switched me and sent me to rural Uruguay. So there was not a whole lot of work for me to do there. And so it was it's kind of, what do you do if you plop a workaholic from the United States into a town that just moves very slowly and does not prioritize efficiency and productivity, and just like watch her flounder. It was basically the gist of it, of like, I, for the first time, had to really take a look at the fact that I thought I had to earn my right to exist. I had to defend my existence by constantly achieving things. This is the college athlete who loves to set goals and then hit them. There was literally nothing for me to do in this town. And yet I did not get struck down by lightning. And that was a really spiritual crisis for me. I realized that I needed to be loved. I tried to earn the love of humans and of God. And it was not cute. But at some point it was so over the top that it became funny.
Yeah.
And so I would send some of these stories home, and before I knew it, I was getting responses from strangers because they were just great stories. And so people would forward them on. And one of my mentors was like, I think you're writing a book. And so I realized, like, oh, I'm here doing nothing so that I can reflect on doing nothing. And talk about some of these ways that the American society, shapes us. So the way that coffee comes in is extremely embarrassing. When I moved to Uruguay, I was, training for marathons. I was a vegetarian. And then they just like plop me in this very slow town that ate every part of the cow. And I became extremely constipated. And it was like coffee like literally saved my life. It was the only thing to kind of
Clean
keep
you
me
out. Yeah.
going. And then that became like a metaphor of just like, I just felt really, really holistically stuck.
Yeah.
And kind of freaked out. And so then, like, what does that mean for my identity and for my worth as a person? Can I be still and know that I am loved in my like non-doing, in my stuckness? So that's how coffee saved my life.
It's a good story.
I was gonna when she said it was embarrassing.
I was like, coffee enema? Is she gonna? I didn't know where it was gonna go.
I was honestly bashfully gonna ask, like, does it have to do with poop?
Yeah,
but
that's usually what's embarrassing is poop. So
that's right.
What a good story, though, to connect with everything that you're doing now. Being able to go to Uruguay, quiet your mind, quiet your body, and really deal with the fact that you can't go at the fast-paced life that you've come, accustomed to. And cool too, pick up, you contacted mentors. And so you've had mentors your whole life then to be able to have, which is a big piece. And I would imagine your embodiment of health and wellness. So that's good.
Totally. My vocation has been by invitation. I'm a generalist. I never knew that one thing that I wanted to do. I'm a little bit interested in everything. And so mentors seeing things in me, naming things in me, inviting me into work has been a huge element in my vocational journey. it has at times felt discontinuous. And then in other moments, I can look back and see the continuity. But being a generalist, I just knew I was never going to do one thing. So when you say, like, when do you sleep? Part of it is just embracing a generalist lifestyle where I have certain tools, like I'm a teacher and I'm a writer and I'm a speaker, but I can bring that to a lot of different things as my passions kind of shift and mold with time.
And we're talking about your book. So 12 Tiny Things.
Yeah.
Is it all right? Are you okay moving from coffee? I'm okay moving from coffee. But 12 Tiny Things, I got to listen to the sample audio portion of the book, so it didn't get too deep into what was going on. But from what I took away is it's a good breakdown of life. We kind of like what our alien question was. We've got this overwhelming universe, this overwhelming fast-paced life in America, and how do we as simplistic humans get through it day by day? And I think breaking it down into those tiny things seems to be the takeaway of the book, which even our most elite forces, the Navy SEALs, they believe in segmenting and then breaking those smaller things down.
Yeah.
Doctors use that a lot for people with depression that can't get out of bed. Can you wiggle your toes? Great. Can you move your leg off the bed? Great. You just segment those into tiny things. And then, so talk a little bit about that book and give us that, which I'm excited to be able to get. I'm on the list. And so it'll be fun to talk to you post podcast about some of these things too.
List, like library list?
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
That's so good. That's so good. Yeah. Okay. So at the time that I wrote 12 Tiny Things, I was working with teenagers and young adults at a Lutheran church, and Heidi Barr, my co-author, was a corporate wellness coach. And so we were working with pretty different people, but we were hearing the exact same thing from both groups, which was extreme overwhelm to the point of feeling paralyzed. So one of the things I think about is, like, now that so many people charge their phones on their nightstands, people can look at their phones and see every single disaster that's happening in the universe before they get out of bed. And so our access to pain and brokenness has skyrocketed, but our ability to address it has not. And so that disconnect can lead to extreme overwhelm, where why would we get out of bed? I love that you mentioned the wiggling the toes, of just like for folks who can't get out of bed. So it's so interesting that this had become a thread of our conversation. Like, being stuck has never been my problem. I don't deal with writer's block, right? I've always wanted to name barriers and move around them. And I think a huge part of the tiny things was for me being a gymnast. From a very young age, I would look at this really crazy, scary thing that I was going to do with my body in the future. And my coaches were able to show me all these tiny incremental progressions to get to that point. Right. And so this thing that would maybe seem insurmountable, the only way to get there is one step at a time. Heidi was a habit stacker, right? And would work with that with her clients. And so neither of us felt this paralyzation that we were hearing from other people. So what if we just play with this idea? We started it as a Facebook group. It went global immediately. So okay, we're on to something. The book ended up kind of being an artifact of this social media movement of let's take one thing a month and just do one tiny thing a day around it and see what happens. So the idea is to cultivate a micro spiritual practice where you're doing one tiny thing a day, but you're doing it on purpose. And we wrote the book pre-pandemic, and then it came out in 2020 in the thick of it. And so Heidi and I were oh, I wonder how this is going to land with this new context. Well, it turns out we needed it even more.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. So many folks over the pandemic who hadn't been overwhelmed, all of a sudden were stuck. And we heard from so many people I don't know about much, but I did my tiny thing today and it helped. Right. So the idea is that, again, that you find what tiny thing works for you. So my favorite example is at least once a day, I go outside and I look all the way up at the sky. And so we're looking for things that are offensively small. So you cannot tell us you're too busy to do them. It takes 10 seconds for me to leave my office, go outside on my front stoop and look up at the sky. Every time that I do that, something shifts where I remember how big the universe is. I remember how beautiful nature is. I'm outside, right? Like during COVID, that was a trick of like just making sure I went outside. And so it rightly situates me in the universe. We're like, the world is big. I am small. I don't have to do it all before lunch, and so that and like when you look up at the sky, I involuntarily take a deep breath, soften my jaw, my shoulders drop. So things are shifting in my body and in my way of being, and it just reorients me. So when I go back to my computer, I don't let this, where like what I'm working on is the entire universe, kind of consume me. It brings a little bit of levity. So we were exploring that idea of can we really do one tiny thing a day, where the world is saying more, can we try less? And the visual is like, can we grow deeper instead of wider, as a way to curb overwhelm and kind of lean into a simple, intentional life. So some folks don't even want to try something new. And I say, well, take a habit, take something you do every day anyway, and do it on purpose. Then that becomes a ritual. So if you drink coffee anyway, take one sip of coffee every day with both of your hands on the mug. You can't be like doom scrolling at the same time, right? And just so it's going to take 10 seconds to wrap both of your hands around your mug, to smell the coffee, to feel the warmth, and to like actually taste that one sip. And it's not going to end systemic oppression, but it is going to shift something tiny. And if we do it every day over a long period of time, we have noticed that it does begin to remove barriers, so that maybe then the second thing reveals itself.
It's living a life of intention.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I couldn't help but also hear it in light of how coffee saved your life, because it might remove barriers. It might move something small.
Yeah. You're not stuck anymore.
You won't be stuck anymore. Something will happen. Something good for you.
Coffee is good.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
good.
And if you go outside and look up, you might think about aliens.
Yeah. It's a big world.
It all comes back. It all comes back.
And isn't that exciting?
Absolutely. That's the one word answer.
Yeah. Well, we're grateful for you,
Yes.
for your interest in this. Like you, really investing in committing to the daily practice of breathing, because it's what you were writing about, and not wanting to be a hypocrite, or, just knowing that it was good for you. We believe in eating French toast on Fridays, because it's not just a name of a podcast. We actually do that when we get together, and that's a ritual.
It has become a ritual.
There's something about that life, when it's sincere, when it's simple, and when it's got plenty of syrup, what else could you ask for?
When I'm flipping those pieces of bread, I'm intentionally thinking Andy's going to like this piece.
Yeah, don't you do it sometimes with two hands on the flipper?
Both hands, and I'm smelling.
Yeah,
so
that's good.
There's a lot going in there.
That's awesome.
Uh-huh.
We kid, but
we're
seriously, the example that you are about these things, about taking them seriously, about paying attention to what your body is saying, about checking in with your mind and your emotions, about holding the people you love tight, and basking in beautiful moments, not moments that are like expensive or, come around once every 25 years, but like just the daily. Beauty. And remembering that. So I hope that that's a reminder to others to just take a deep breath and to do that. I prepped you for this. We don't pay our guests, but we do ask them to think about causes that they care about, and to give a plug for them. And then as a thank you for sharing stories and joining us in the conversation, we'll give a gift to them as well and support them. So the floor is yours. What would you like to tell people about?
Okay. I had so many things. It was so hard to pick one. So the book, my second book, Play Like a Girl, tells this amazing story about a free girls' school in Kenya, called Kibera Girls Soccer Academy. It started as a girls' soccer team in an area where girls didn't get to play soccer. And the girls had dropped out of school because they couldn't pay tuition. And so the coach opened his home up for an informal school that then exploded. And they now have 130 students, and they're sending their girls to college. So it's just this really amazing success story. And we all know that everybody wins when more girls get to go to school. So then my children's book, Remarkable Rose, focuses on one of those girl soccer players who was told, you're a girl, you don't get to play soccer. And she said she felt in her bones that she was supposed to play. And so Abdul kind of saw her kicking a ball of paper around with her eyes on fire and invited her to join this girls' team. And she was part of the inaugural class at Key Bear Girls Soccer Academy. So 2 of my 5 books are about this amazing school. I believe in gender equity in sports. I believe in gender equity in education. So Key Bear Girls Soccer Academy, they have a foundation here in the United States because the University of Minnesota has a study abroad program in Nairobi where the school is one of the placement sites. So a bunch of college graduates started a nonprofit to support the school. So KGSA Foundation is my choice.
So spell what the name is of the school is.
It's KIBERA, Kibera Girls Soccer Academy.
And the actual nonprofit is a different name. Did you give an acronym?
KGSA Foundation.
It's actually the first letters of everything you just spelled out.
Oh, they should have a name for that.
Right.
For when you do that with words. Well, shout out to Abdul, shout out to Rose, shout out to you for telling their stories. And we believe that there's a lot of people out in the world telling a great story with their life in all sorts of different ways. We're grateful for the ways that you're doing that and then for your willingness to share that with us. So thanks for being with us, Ellie Roscher.
Thanks, Ellie.
Thank you so much. It was delightful.
That was awesome. This episode of French Toast Fridays is sponsored by Align Coaching, guidance to live in alignment with your purpose and values.
What's up, Toasties? Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about today's guest or anything we talked about, visit the show page on FrenchToastFridays.com. We believe that a lot of people have great stories that are worth telling, and we plan on continuing to do this. So if you know someone who would be a great guest, or if you want to be a sponsor on the show, please send us a note at FrenchToastPod@gmail.com. And always remember, life is best when it's simple and sincere with plenty of syrup.